So what about California? I need the Jeopardy theme. It's not written down. It never happened. Remember that. All of your pesticide records, all of your training records, all of everything, it's written down. Employees signed what they did to document that they actually went through the training, et cetera, et cetera. You fixed something, you did proper maintenance on something, everything is written down, or in a court of law, it never happened. So heat illness, this is an important subset of worker safety. And in subchapter 7 of the General Industrial Safety Orders, Group 2, safe practices and personal protection, personal safety devices and safeguards. So you drill down, you can read the California government codes to look at how they deal with heat illness. And heat illness is something that you need to have a plan for. What happens when it's too warm in the field? How do you provide adequate water, clean, cool drinking water to your workers? How do you provide proper breaks and proper shade areas for them to take their breaks? And there's specific guidelines, some of which didn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense, but I think most of the kinks, most of the problems have been worked out to where most companies are doing a much, much better job. But the heat illness prevention rules can be incorporated into your injury and illness prevention program. Another acronym. Lucky you. You need to know IIPP as well, Injury and Illness Prevention Program, or is it illness and injury? Doesn't matter. Which one comes first, it doesn't matter to me. But the IIPP is your specific plan on how to deal with everything regarding your employees' injury and illness prevention. What do you do? What is your worker safety plan? And you're required to have one. And there are great cookie cutter starting tools where you can start with some generic IIPP. And as you go through it, just make changes that make sense for your company as long as it's applying to the law. But no injury and illness prevention program or plan, again, I don't care if you use program or plan because I've seen them used interchangeably. It can't know your specific situation. So how much water do you have to make available to your employees? That is a minimum set by law. You can't change that. Well, I'm only going to give our employees 1 quart per day. No, you can't do that. But you can, in your own company's plan, set up exactly how you're going to provide shade. There might be shade available in different ways on different ranches. Maybe you have a permanent shade building on one ranch that you can utilize. Maybe one of your ranches is this long, thin row crop area with some shade trees right next to it. You can use the shade trees if they're on your property. Anyway, the IIPP is specific to your company. The enforcement of heat illness prevention is under the Division of Occupational Safety and Health at the federal level, or CalOSHA at the California state level. So the ones that really do the boots on the ground work are likely the Ag Commissioner and occasionally CalOSHA. So what is heat illness? It means a serious medical condition resulting from the body's inability to cope with a particular heat load and includes heat cramps, heat exhaustion, heat syncope, and heat stroke. So heat syncope, you're getting dizzy, possibly fainting, and heat stroke is near death. And it can be surprising how quickly this can happen. You need to be watching your fellow workers. You need to talk to fellow workers. When I've worked with crews, I encourage them to pay attention to their work, but talk a little bit. And I don't mean just gossip, but talk about the work, talk about something, say something, because when you talk to your fellow worker, that's a red flag. You start slurring your words a little bit. You start saying something that has absolutely no sense, or just they're confusing, and you're like, what's going on? And if somebody starts slurring, starts moving in a funny manner, whatever, you're on the verge of it's too late to catch it early. It's now entering emergency situation. Get them to shade, get them to drink some water, call 911. Very serious condition, and you need to know how to deal with it. Now, in Salinas, do we have this kind of a problem? Yeah. Is it as serious as Fresno? Not at all. Fresno has a much bigger problem with heat illness, obviously, than we do here in Salinas. But in Salinas, in a way, it has a little more insidious problems because we don't deal with heat that much. We're not used to it that much. My personal situation with heat illness was mostly because I would have crews helping me with the seed fields over in the areas of Firebaugh or somewhere like that, down past Huron, south of Huron, and it gets really hot out there. And I've got a crew that's, including myself, that's been in Salinas wearing jackets, and the next day it's 115. Now that only happened once, but 105 happened a lot. 105 from 55, and your body's not ready for it. And so you're taking people who aren't used to it, putting them in an environment that's too hot, and you got to pay attention. You got to remind people. You got to talk and make sure they're talking okay. You got to make sure they're drinking water. You got to make sure that they're using the restroom. Everybody should use the restroom a couple of times. If they're not drinking enough water. Anyway, so what do you do to prevent heat illness? Water. It's one of the main things to do. Lots of good, clean, potable, means drinking water, clean, healthy drinking water. It has to be in sufficient quantity. I think it's still the same at 1 quart per employee per hour. And if that's changed, I would suggest you always double check the rules, but I'm pretty sure that is a stable number now. 1 quart per employee per hour. Access to shade for at least 5 minutes, open to the air, so it can't be inside some enclosed pressure cooker tent structure. It has to be shade and it has to be open air. Some sort of ventilation or cooling can be provided outside of the open air design, depending on what you have. And the shade is permitted at all times, depending on the temperature. Again, the rules change, and I'm not going to try and quote the temperatures, but it starts getting hot, the rules change. You've got to allow employees to take these 5-minute breaks. Effective on 17th of March in 2009 is when the modern version of heat illness prevention standard was implemented. There have been minor tweaks, to my understanding, since 2009, but the meat of it really happened on this particular day with that 1 quart per hour per worker of water. Shade 25% of the crew at a time within 5-minute walk of their work area. That one was part of the very difficult things to impose in some ranches. When it takes for some very large blocks, 6 minutes to get to the center of the field. How can you provide 5-minute shade? Well, OSHA would say break the block up, put a road down the middle of it, lose a little bit of acreage, but make a smaller block. In 2011, there was an audit performed that found after a couple of years of this really strong promotion of heat illness prevention, 50%, over 50% of the companies audited in California were out of compliance with the law. They weren't providing enough shade, they weren't providing enough water, they weren't providing what was required under the law. So as a result of that, in 2012, OSHA, Cal OSHA developed a heat illness prevention campaign to ramp it up and get out to the growers. And they started an office in Bakersfield, which I'm pretty sure that it's still, 9 years later, it's still in full swing. I think I've mentioned this in a previous presentation, but the Farm Employers Labor Service has a heat illness summary to help growers understand their responsibilities. And it's a great resource for employers, for farm operators to understand, not just about heat illness prevention, but about anything when you're dealing with farm labor. How do you make sure you're following the law, you're providing what's required, and you're doing what you should be doing? So now we've got the IIPP, Injury and Illness Prevention Program. Now, if it's injury and illness or illness and injury on a test, I'm not going to ding you for that. Or if you use program or plan, I'm not going to ding you for that. But I'm certain that this one is correct. Injury and Illness Prevention Program is what is written under the law. And so this is at the federal level, the Department of Industrial Relations, and everybody has to have some sort of an injury and illness prevention program in place that's specific to your company. And like I said, you can create your own document using templates that are already there. So it doesn't have to be a monumental task, but employers must establish a plan. Then you have to implement it. You can't just say, we've got it in a binder on a shelf. It's not about being in a binder on a shelf. That's step one. You actually have to do all those things in the field. You have to implement it. And you don't just do it once, you have to maintain it, which means as things change, you've got to review your program, make sure that it still matches your company size, the ranches you have, the surrounding environment, all of the things specific to your company, things like who's in charge, who do you call, which hospital you go to. If an employer, maybe one of the supervisors has to take a worker to the hospital, where do they go? You can't put a generic plan for everybody in the country. You need something specific to your situation from your location. And maybe you've got multiple locations. So, if you're on ranches in Salinas, you're going to go to Salinas Valley Memorial Hospital. But if you're in our King City location, blah, 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 blah. So the program must be effective and it must be written. You can't just say, "Oh, we got a plan. I told all the employees what to do." And they signed a document saying that they heard me say it. No, it has to be written. It has to be reviewable by employees as well as the regulatory authorities. At a minimum, an IIPP must identify the person or persons with authority and responsibility for implementing the program. Who's making sure this program is happening? It must include a system for ensuring that employees comply. It's not all the responsibility of the employer. Employees must comply. If you've got a hard hat area where employees must wear hard hats, you need to train them there first. You should post it hard hat area on a sign, but then employees must follow that rule. If they go into that area, they got to put on their damn hard hat. What do you do if they don't? There has to be some sort of a system to document, reprimand, even fire employees who don't comply, who don't follow safety rules. They put everybody at risk. The IIPP must include a system for communicating with employees in a form readily understandable by all affected employees. You can't have a posting in Mandarin when your employees speak Spanish. It has to be a language they understand, trainings they understand, documents, meetings, on and on. There are lots of ways to communicate, and in every company I've ever been in, it's a combination of these things. It's a combination of trainings, postings, handouts. Postings can be very simple, bold, hard hat area sign. Or they can be more detailed break room lists of forklift safety rules that sit on the wall in the break room. So, you train your employees on it, and then whenever they want to review while they're eating lunch, it's right there on the wall. They can sit there and read it. Lots and lots of ways to follow the rules. A lot of times I've seen in the fields where there are posters all over the bathrooms in order for the company to say, yeah, we're complying with the law, we're posting this. Do employees actually read what's on a porta potty out in the field? Probably not. Is that the most effective way of doing it? You better be doing something else. It complies with the law, but it's probably not reaching very many employees. IIPPs must include procedures for identifying and evaluating workplace hazards. So how do you find what are the hazards? And what happens when those change? You start doing things differently, you get new equipment, new chemicals, new machinery, new ways of doing things, on and on and on, that are things that are new that you didn't have 5 years ago when you first wrote the IIPP. The IIPP must include a procedure to investigate occupational injury or occupational illness. What do you do when something happens? Just because you have an IIPP doesn't mean nobody will ever get sick or injured. It reduces the likelihood, hopefully, and it reduces it substantially. But eventually, somebody's going to get hurt. What do you do? What's the procedure? How do you look into it? How do you figure out what happened? What went wrong? Why did somebody get hurt? What can we do to prevent this in the future so nobody else gets hurt in the same or similar fashion? The IIPP must include methods and or procedures for correcting unsafe or unhealthy conditions, work practices, and work procedures in a timely manner and based on the severity of the hazard. So, for example, the PTO shielding breaks free. You can't use it anymore. That piece of equipment is too dangerous without the shield. You need to get somebody in there, a welder, a fabricator, somebody to fix it before you continue work. But there's a nail coming up a little bit on a loose stair, and it's fine. You just don't want somebody to trip on that loose stair. So you get a work order and it's going to be done on Friday, no problem. Minor severity, minor issue, highly unlikely it could possibly have a problem. Get to it soon. If it's truly dangerous, stop work until it's fixed or handled. And again, the details of this depends. There's lots of court cases and precedent to make it clear, but better safe than sorry. IIPPs must provide training and instruction when the program is established. At the very beginning, everybody gets trained. Anytime a new employee comes on, that new employee must be trained. And the challenge with new employees is you got a lot of things. You got to deal with the IIPP, you got to deal with pesticide training. You've got all these things you need to train an employee on before they can go to work. If an employee is given new job assignments, they're going to be doing something new in a new area. Well, that new area has its own set of safety rules. Whenever new substances, processes, procedures, equipment, blah, 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 there's a new hazard, more training. If there's a new or previously unrecognized hazard, so you have your perfect IIPP and somebody points out, maybe an inspector, maybe an employee, hey, we really should have some safety on this. Uh-oh, we missed that before. Better train everybody on it. It's been newly identified. And to familiarize supervisors with hazards to employees under their immediate direction and control. So it's not just the employees, but everything that those employees do under the supervision of a given supervisor, that supervisor needs the same training that everybody under that supervisor has. So they understand all of the safety issues for everybody under their supervisory control. So the IIPP records must include scheduled and periodic inspections, safety and health training records, and all of these records must be maintained for at least 1 year. And I would advise that you consult your corporate attorney or whoever is responsible for your legal obligations for the company to find out how long is too long. Sometimes keeping records for too long has its own potential pitfalls. Not too likely in IIPPs, but always double check. All right, we need it for less than 1 year, but at what point do we throw things out? Do we go through them every 6 months? And anything that's older than 18 months, we send to the shredder? But it is good to review your records and shred things that are getting too old. It's always a good idea. And I will defer to your corporate attorney to determine what is too old that could present challenges or potential liability if you hold on to something too long. Pesticide safety, the California Code of Regulations, Division 6, Pesticide and Pest Control Operations under the California Department of Pesticide Regulation, California DPR. Employers of pesticide handlers must have a written training program for the employees. So this is different because it's pesticides and it's a different area. So you need a specific training program just for pesticides. And to be a handler is a specific category of training. If you are just incidentally involved, because maybe you're part of a harvest crew, you're going into a field that was previously sprayed. You're not handling the pesticides, but you're going into fields after the reentry or restricted entry interval is elapsed. So the REI is over, you're going into the field. You need training about working around places that have been sprayed with pesticides. But you're not a handler. The handlers have a higher level of training. And because of the dangers of pesticides, handlers must be retrained every single year. So there's a hazard communication program for pesticides, including what's called the safety data sheets. This is an old term. They used to be called material safety data sheets, MSDSs. Now they're just called safety data sheets, SDSs. And occasionally you still run across the term material safety data sheet or MSDS, but I don't know how long it's been, probably, I don't even want to venture a guess, but it's been a number of years that the M has been dropped and they just call them safety data sheets. And you need safety data sheets for every single pesticide used. And you might need them for OSHA as well. I needed to have safety data sheets for the toilet bowl cleanser that I got from Safeway that was under the sink because it is a chemical that is dangerous. You can't drink the toilet bowl cleaner, and it's at a work site. I needed a safety data sheet in my binder for the toilet bowl cleanser in the off the lunch break room. Everything. You need the safety data sheets. Provide periodic cholinesterase blood tests under certain conditions. Certain pesticides react if you get contaminated. They react in a way that you can detect it in your blood. If you've been exposed, especially small excessive dose exposures over a longer period of time, you can have these cholinesterase levels that would indicate you've had excessive exposure. So you keep an eye on it. You keep an eye on your employees. You do these quick and easy, inexpensive blood tests to make sure that they're not showing any kind of signs of exposure to pesticides, certain pesticides. You have to have a written respiratory program. How do you get proper fitting, proper training, proper choice of filters for the chemicals you use, et cetera, et cetera. The employees must require people working alone with restricted pesticides labeled dangerous to have contact with another person every 2 hours during daylight and every hour at night. And I've got an easy solution to this. Nobody's ever alone if they're working with dangerous pesticides, ever. Is that required under federal law? No. But I think it's a good idea. Somebody's nearby doing something. What about contractors? They're not necessarily your employees. You have labor contractors doing harvest operations, maybe weeding and thinning. There are a number of things. You might have some plumber coming to your site to fix a valve. They know nothing about agriculture. They just know about plumbing. They're on your site. They must be notified of areas of pesticide applications and areas where entry is restricted. You've got to keep people informed. And just because they're not your employees, if they're coming onto your property for any reason, they need to be notified. And even if somebody drives off the side of the road to steal your strawberries, they need to be notified. How? By putting up signs. See, the agricultural hazardous materials transportation endorsement. There's specific driver training, and so there's specific requirements if you're driving trucks with pesticides in it. So the DL-267 holders, the holders of this certificate, are exempted from the hazardous materials provisions of the California Commercial Driver's License Program, including but not limited to drug and alcohol testing. Won't get into the specific of that, but you need to know to be in compliance with the Department of Transportation, DOT, and that's what DOT is, Department of Transportation. You need to make sure that you know what your drivers are required to do. Are they transporting these materials? Well, commercial truck drivers bring a shipment of pesticides from the manufacturer to an outlet, a retail outlet. That's a different scenario than one of your field supervisors bringing some pesticides to the applicator out in the field from your warehouse to the field. Very different things. You need to make sure you know, and I don't even want to try to get into that here. But when you're putting pesticides in a vehicle and transporting it, you better know what is and is not legal. Very critical. Tractor and equipment safety. Let me take another quick break.